friends. I am going to go ahead and cut up some lobster mushrooms to put them in the dryer. Maybe cut up a few for the pan as well. And then I have a bunch of these chanterelles that I need to cook down as well. These chanterelles have been in the fridge for a little over a week now. And a few of them are getting a little kind of dicey looking like that. They've turned kind of dark brown. So I might toss those or trim off the pieces that I don't want. But most of them still look really good. There's still a fair bit of dirt on them, and so I gotta clean them off a bit. Maybe we'll start by just cutting up a couple of the lobsters here. This is a beautiful, weird looking mushroom called Hypomyces lactiflorum. And these are created when a base species of Russula or Lactarius is colonized by this red mold called Hypomyces lactiflorum. So it's a basidiomycete mushroom, normal standard cap and gill kind of mushroom, and it gets covered in this mold and it completely transforms it into this weird gnarled shape that doesn't have any gills, and instead of making spores for the mushroom, instead it makes all these little mold spores, which are this white stuff is. So these are a pretty decent edible mushroom. They are kind of crunchy and a little bit, I don't know, the texture can be kind of grainy sometimes. And so what I like to do is cook the absolute crap out of them. And I think that really helps improve their texture because, like I said, otherwise they can be kind of grainy. I also really like them dried because their flavor improves when you dry them. And they don't really smell or taste like seafood. But as they get a little bit older, and I can smell this one right here is a little bit older. You can see it has some bug damage. This one doesn't. It's kind of a crapshoot as to whether or not they'll have bugs inside them. I'm going to take the ones that are a little bit older, a little more funky, and dry them out because that'll just enhance their flavor. And anything that's a little bit younger, maybe I'll fry that in the pan. So I'm going to dry some out here. I guess I'll just cut through these and figure which ones are kind of gnarly and which ones are fresh. And yeah, that's what I'm doing. So before I put these in the fridge, I gave them a really good wash and scrub down. And this is actually really cool. You can see here, if you look at the edge of this mushroom, the Hypomyces lactiflorum doesn't penetrate all the way in, but it does penetrate on the outside. And you can see this layer here where the mold has transformed the mushroom. I just think that's one of the coolest things about these lobster mushrooms is, just how they are formed. It's a really interesting bit of biology. Another one of the things I'm going to do, since when you cut up lobsters, they are kind of crunchy, grainy, whatever you want to call them. You get a lot of little pieces on your board. And what I'm going to do with some of those pieces of lobster mushroom are to imbue a butter with them, because lobster mushrooms have this beautiful orangey color, and when you cook them in a pan, they transfer that orangey color to the fat, the butter, the oil, whatever you use in the pan. And if you cook eggs in them afterwards, it'll actually turn purple, because the pigments that made this bright orange, when they're acidic, are kind of reddish orange, and then when they go basic, they turn purple. So your lobster mushroom fat can turn eggs purple, which is really cool. But all these little bits come off aren't necessarily great to cook, but I can cook them into a butter, imbue the butter with the flavor of the lobster mushrooms, the color of the lobster mushrooms, and then keep that butter in my fridge for a long time. I'll probably have a little garlic and herbs in there too. So it'll be kind of a cool ingredient to have in my fridge. So that's a hack I learned for some mushroom friends. Oh yeah, these are good. I'm really happy with most of these. They're not super buggy. A lot of people complain about lobster mushrooms. Let's crack this one. Ooh, it's perfect. Oh my God, yes. Oh, so stoked that I found so many of these that were in such good shape. Because yeah, I think people have a pretty legitimate complaint that a lot of time lobster mushrooms don't taste so great because they can be full of bugs. But I only had one here that was even a little bit buggy. everything else has been pretty much pristine, which is great to see. So, and you know, buggy one, that ain't no problem. You dry it out and it'll be fine. You know, what you're drying them out for is the flavor. Oh, that's a really thick piece. Maybe I'll just cut this in half. I like doing fairly big, chunky, thick pieces of lobster mushrooms, even when I go to cook them. So I think that allows you to kind of condense the texture. The grainy texture on the lobster mushroom comes from the fact that Lactarius and Russula mushrooms, which are the base species for the Hypomyces lactiflorum, they are made of these spheroid cells that are kind of round, and that gives them that grainy texture. But clearly the Hypomyces kind of causes them to act differently. You can see the insides of this thing are kind of weird looking. Look at that. It's the mold penetrating the mushroom, taking over all its systems, hijacking what's going on. The biology of this mushroom changes dramatically because of the mold that's infected it. I think that's just really cool. It's just really, really cool. So, anyhow, I'm going to just randomly pick a few more pieces here to put them in the dryer. And I just sent out some lobster mushroom to my friend, Mushroom Musketeer. She makes great mushroom content on TikTok. I don't know if she's here on YouTube, but she might be. So I just sent her a bunch of my dried lobster mushroom, and so I'm trying to replenish my stash, as it were. Okay, so I got one nice big tray. That looks pretty good, huh? Pretty good. So I'm going to stick this in my dehydrator, and then we're going to go ahead and start cooking some lobster mushrooms. Okay, let's see here. Oop, get the mic back on. There. Sorry if the noise of the dehydrator in the background bugs you, but just deal with it. That's life, you know. It bugs me too when I have it on for days, hours on end, but ideally the thing you're dehydrating just gets dehydrated, and then you're all done. Okay, so we got a nice set of lobster mushrooms here. I haven't decided. I cooked up some earlier today with some chanterelles, some onions, and some jalapenos. Those are seasoned kind of heavily, so I'll probably cook them into dishes over the next week. What I might do with these lobsters is cook them fairly plainly, maybe just salt and a little bit of oil, and then freeze them to keep around for other applications throughout the year. I'm hoping to make it up to Humboldt as well to get a few more lobster mushrooms. I don't know. I have a lot of work to do on my book, and going to Humboldt is a long, long drive to do by yourself. So I haven't entirely decided when I'm going up there, how I'm going to get up there, or anything like that. And Humboldt would be where I'd probably find more of these lobster mushrooms. But it's possible. I did find these are the ones I found in Mendocino, so you can find them further south. But it's always kind of a crapshoot. So I'm just cutting up some smaller pieces here to do my butter infused lobster stuff. I think that'll be pretty good. Okay, so let's go over to the pan, and we're gonna get these lobsters working, and then I'm gonna start cleaning some chanterelles in the background, and take a look at that. So there's the lobsters, looking pretty good. Here's the chanterelles, and whoop, a little cut on my island here. Okay, so I gotta move this thing. This is how I hold my camera up. I just bought a new one of these because I ruined the old one by always trying to like twist it around. So I'm gonna pick the camera up now and reorient it by hand in the hopes that maybe we can keep this around a little bit longer. Okay. Sorry, I gotta adjust with the arm and butcher block. I don't know, there's a lot of components that go into streaming live cooking here. There we go. Putting that down. Oh, pick up these little bits of lobster mushroom. I want those. Okay. Let me just put some salt on these guys, and we'll let them rip. So, pretty high heat, sort of medium high-ish, and I'm just gonna let those hang out until they get nice and condensed. And back around here, I'm gonna use a knife and clean up a couple of chanterelles. Chanterelles need a fair bit of cleaning because if you don't clean them, well, they just end up tasting like dirt. And that's not great. It's not good eats. The parts that are pretty dark on a chanterelle too, that are discolored or dried, or sometimes in the winter you even find them like partially frozen, I usually trim those off. So I find it kind of can lend a weird flavor to the chanterelles. When I'm cooking chanterelles whole, or like I'm probably going to freeze the majority of these, I'm going to keep the pieces pretty big. Because if you cut them really small, you can only really use them as, you know, for filling or stuffing or something. If you keep them big though, you can always like serve them up as chanterelles, or you can blend them into a soup, or you can cut them up later. You just have more options if you're going to cook them in big chunks or even whole. I'm not going to do them whole necessarily. I'm just trying to trim off pieces here that look a little not so fresh, because these have been in the fridge for about a week and a half, maybe more. And then I actually washed them earlier today, so they've been sitting around wet all day too, which can also hasten their demise. So I'm just trying to get these things cleared out. I did go back to where I found the chanterelles, this same batch, and there were more. They were all dried out because it had been just an epically, stupidly hot heat wave here in California over the last week, and all the mushies that were coming up nicely in the fog drip had just dried out. So when I got these chanterelles, I left a bunch behind in the hopes that the other ones that were there would get bigger and I could come back and get them, and nope, it's not the case. They just got totally dried out. So maybe I should have taken more when I was there, but it's fine. There was plenty of mushrooms in the woods. There will be plenty more mushrooms later. I will get plenty more mushrooms. The woods will have plenty of mushrooms. We're all going to be happy. I think there's always that sort of moment as a mushroom hunter where you're like, well, should I take anything? You know, like I don't want to hurt the forest, but then you're like, well, I do want to go home with some edible mushrooms. And you know, as I've said many times before on my podcast and elsewhere, I think the thing that really is impacting how many mushrooms show up year to year isn't human foraging activity. It's not whether somebody took too many chanterelles as to whether or not they'll show up again next year. It has all to do with the health of your forest, your habitat, your ecosystem, the weather patterns. There's so much more that goes into it that's not just like whether or not humans were there. You certainly can have an overextension of like the forest ecosystem if there's too many people coming in trying to harvest mushrooms, and I think the bigger thing that's happening there isn't even necessarily that humans taking mushrooms out of the environment is hurting them. It's that humans are compacting the soil, which then makes it harder for more mushrooms to flush. There are some long-term studies on the effects of humans on the abundance of mushrooms, and does foraging impact the abundance of mushrooms. And significantly, it sort of said, no, it doesn't really appear that like human foraging activity has a big impact on the appearance of the number of mushrooms. It doesn't matter whether you cut or you pluck your mushrooms. That has been scientifically debunked. I think cutting your mushrooms may be important for certain select species. Stuff like polypores, I will cut them off, because if you cut them off, they can keep growing. I do like to cut morels specifically because they're growing in these like very highly disturbed soils, and I find that cutting the mushroom tends to kind of disrupt the soil less. I don't think it really has that much to do with whether or not the mushroom will appear again in the same spot, because that's just not how morels work. Morels are complicated ecology. I talked about that on, I think, episode 15 of my podcast. Check it out. That podcast is here on YouTube. It's also on Spotify and Callin and several of the other major platforms for podcasts. So you can find it all over the place. I haven't planned a season 2 yet. I am going to do a season 2. Right now I've just been focusing on writing the book, because that's kind of my priority, and I can come back to podcasting when I feel like it. And I still go live all the time, which is, basically the same thing as the podcast. My podcast is a live stream basically, and then we post it. So, okay, so these are pretty dry. Get a nice little char on them. I'm gonna go ahead and put down some oil. Turn the heat down just a tiny bit, and we're just gonna char these really nicely. Yeah, that's looking good. Looking great. Okay. So as soon as those are donezo, I'm going to go ahead with my shanties and cook those too. Probably, like I said, cooking both these sets of mushrooms just to freeze. But I might save a few just in like a Tupperware and eat some during the week. It is really great to have just like access to wild mushrooms. They're incredible source of food, really good protein. They are delicious. They are good for you. They are a really fun ingredient to cook with and keep around. Huge fan of mushroom foraging. It's a way to get food that I otherwise wouldn't have access to or couldn't afford, because wild mushrooms can be very expensive. And so it takes time to find them, and I am lucky that I have the opportunity and the access and the knowledge, I guess, to go out and find them and spend time looking for them. It definitely comes from a place of privilege that I'm able to do that, and so I don't necessarily recommend that like wild mushrooms are the way to go for everybody. But if you do happen to live in an area where they grow and you have time to go find them, it's a pretty cool way to get food. So you can also, growing mushrooms is pretty easy, and I highly recommend people look into doing home cultivation of mushrooms. There's a great mushroom company, North Spore, that I have visited, and I have gotten a lot of their kits. I've gotten a lot of their cultivation supplies, and I like using their stuff to grow mushrooms in my backyard. They've got some really good tutorials here on YouTube, but also on like TikTok and Instagram, about how you can put together mushroom beds or even your own mushroom kits. And it's significantly cheaper to put together your own sort of mushroom substrate and use some of their spores or some of their spawn to inoculate a large volume of substrate and then get a lot of mushrooms that way. It's a really good project for like a neighborhood, or hell, like a high school science project or something like that, because it takes a little bit of work to set up the whole thing, but it's not terribly hard, and there's a really high payoff if you get a whole bunch of mushrooms. You can take one bag of spawn, which is like $25-$30, something like that, and inoculate probably like 50 bags worth of straw and get a ton of mushrooms out of that single bag of spawn. And you can give them away. We do that in my local mushroom club. We do these days at the farmer's market where we get a couple of bags of spawn, we get someone to boil a couple big drums worth of straw, and then we just have people come and mix straw and the oyster spawn together and pack it into bags, and they take those bags home and they donate a little bit of money to Soma. We're able to give money for scholarships. We gave away, I think, $18,000 this year in scholarships to support mycological research of different graduate students and people, trying to build academic careers in mycology, which is cool. It's really cool. I love being a part of that, and I want to do like more fundraising, using mushrooms to help build community and promote science, and really support researchers and students and people that want to make a difference in the world. So I think it's all pretty cool. Okay. So those lobster mushrooms look pretty good. Add one more little pinch of salt here. If I was going to eat these right now, I'd probably keep cooking them down till they were a little bit more dehydrated, and maybe even some of the sort of the whitish color was cooked out of them. I'm trying to find a piece that looks, like a little. Some of these little pieces are getting a little bit more heat. Those are getting a little bit more dehydrated. I mean, again, I like to do that because it kind of stops them from being grainy. Nice hard sear on a piece of lobster mushroom like this is good. This is what you want. Some of these other things don't have quite enough color on them yet, but that's okay. I'm gonna pop them out because I'll end up cooking these later. So I'm gonna go ahead and just throw these into a bowl and let them hang out for a minute or two. I'm using a metal bowl, so it's not plastic. These are too hot; they melt plastic. Okay, we're gonna go in a whole bunch of chanterelles. That's a nice sizzle. I'm going to just put a nice solid handful of salt on these. And these are going to bleed a lot of moisture. There's no oil in the pan. And that's good because there's going to be a lot of moisture coming off these guys. These soaked earlier today. I got them about as clean as I could, but there's still some junk on there. And if it comes out, I'll try to fish it out. But like I said, I'm going to cook them kind of whole, or at least in big chunks, because that'll give me more options what I want to do with them later. If I want to blend them in a soup, I can do that. If I want to chop them up and put them in a filling or a pasta, I can do that. If I want to leave them big and put them with some roast meat and have that texture, I can do that too. So I'm going to just put the mic down by the shanties, and you guys can watch them cook off for a little bit here. Nice and soupy. That's okay though. The water is okay. We're just cooking all the liquid out. And that's why we didn't add fat first. If I added fat, it would prevent all the water from cooking out, and then the chanterelles would just stay soggy and insipid instead of getting nice brown and crispy like they're going to be. Picking off little bits of needles and dirt and stuff that I can see here. Chanterelles are hard to clean. Despite having soaked these for 3 times and doing an extensive going over them with a little knife, picking out all the little dirt bits, I'm still just finding dirt after dirt after dirt. That's part of why chanterelles taste earthy, And there's dirt on them. You're not going to get it out. Mm-hmm. Just cooking the crap out of it. I'm turn the heat way up here too. Speed these up. So another thing I can do, and I might do this with these, is I might even skip adding oil to the pan. Because if you do add fat, fat is the thing that goes rancid in the freezer. So if you're cooking mushrooms straight to freeze, it can be a good idea to just boil them or steam them or pan fry them without any oil, adding any fat, and that later gives you more options in terms of what you can do with them, because they will stay fresh for longer. And I was just eating some chanterelles that have been in the fridge since last year. They tasted great. Their texture was still good. It's just sort of amazing how much, how long mushrooms can last. A lot of foods in the freezer lose it relatively quickly, and mushrooms cook and freeze very, very well. So, again, it gets to the idea that foraging mushrooms is a lot of work, and mushrooms can be very expensive, but it's a high value food item because they taste good, they have cool texture, they're very nutritious. They're sort of unique in the world of food in some ways. They are their own special category of protein and all the other stuff. So they're not quite meat. They're not quite a vegetable. And they, texturally they're really interesting because they do have sort of meaty texture, but you can't overcook a mushroom the way you can with meat. And they kind of look like plants, and we think of them like plants. They aren't. They're very different biology. And yet, you can cook them for a really long time, and the texture won't change, whereas most plants will break down. So that makes them very unlike meat or plants, because depending on how you cook them, their texture is always going to be great. You can do different cooking methods, not just pan frying. You can do frying if you want to be crispy. You can dehydrate them and intensify the flavor. You can do all these different ways of treating a mushroom that, significantly expands upon its texture and flavor and helps optimize different aspects of a mushroom depending on what you want to do with it. Okay, so I'm just basically waiting for this water to cook off. The mushrooms are pretty much cooked through. I'm just dehydrating everything here. So I'll just keep going with that. Chanterelles get much darker as you cook them, but some of these are getting so dark because I think they were already a little bit old. That should be okay though. The flavor and the texture will still be there. They just won't be quite as pretty and golden as they might be if they were fresher. Now these are getting pretty close. I can see the liquid is almost dried out. This is getting pretty close to the point where I'd add a little bit of oil. If I was going to keep cooking these down, it'd be a good time to add some onion and any other veggies you might want to cook in with them. But since these are pretty much destined for the freezer, I think I might cut it. I'm just let them sort of finish dehydrating here, and they'll make great fodder for soups, maybe like a cream of chanterelle soup or a mushroom chowder. I'll put them in with some roast chicken or roast meats into something. I think that would be really delicious. So anyhow, there's my chanterelles. Here's the lobster mushrooms that we cooked down. And hey, it's Gordon, fascinated by fungi. Thanks for hanging out with me, joining me. If you'd like to learn more from me, check out my website, fascinatedbyfungi.com. You can also check out my podcast here on YouTube. I am on every imaginable social platform. So I've got a TikTok and an Instagram and a Pinterest and a Twitter and a Patreon and all sorts of stuff. You can find cool original merch on my website, and you can also get discounts for mushroom kits and other grow supplies, all sorts of stuff. Anyhow, it's been fun. Be well. Bye-bye, guys. Adios.